Hello, my name is Joe Cooper with VMware Education, and in this video, we'll have a quick and simple look at a way to install ESXi on your host system. It's actually pretty easy to do. We're going to start by heading over to the VMware download site, where we will have the option of choosing the version of vSphere that we'd like to install. Okay, you can click on the vSphere download links, but if you're doing this in a home lab, you might want to have a simple look at the vSphere hypervisor, which is actually free and doesn't require any sort of license key or anything like that. But we're going to go ahead and install the full hypervisor version of ESXi from the vSphere download site. Now today is March 28th of 2020, and the current version of ESXi is version 6.7. But by the time you see this, it'll be the version 7.0 will be available. But right now you can see that there are a couple of versions available. So 7.0 will be available by the time you see this, or will have been at least announced by the time you see this. So we're going to go ahead and download version 7, which I've gotten from the VMware beta program. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to use this tool. This is an ISO image, so we use this tool called Rufus. And Rufus allows us to copy ISO images to USB sticks. So let's just drag this right over here. And it's a 128 gig USB stick, but you can do it in as low as about 8 gigs, or I think it actually will even work on a 4 gig stick at this point. Okay, so we'll hit the start button and we'll erase all of the partitions on the existing USB stick and copy the hypervisor installer over to this USB stick. And when we come back, we're actually going to go ahead and pop it into a little super micro server that I have in my home lab here, and boot that super micro server to this USB stick and install ESXi. All right, so that's all done, and let's carry that right over, and when we come back, we'll see it boot. Now that we have got our server booted, we've got a boot menu up, and we'll use the UEFI boot because ESXi supports secure UEFI boot. So we'll do a UEFI install here from our USB stick. Now, once we get this started, you'll see the hypervisor installer coming up. And it only takes a couple of minutes, and it gets to a point where it prompts you for a few things. So we'll speed the video up a little bit here. And the system is booted and ready for me to install. Now, you might be tempted just to go through these screens really quickly, but I'll describe them for you here a little bit. What it's telling you here is that ESXi will run on most Intel or AMD based processors. There are even some other processors that VMware has compiled ESXi for. But really what you want to do to make sure when you run in production is that your system is on VMware's hardware compatibility list. VMware's hardware compatibility list can be found on VMware's website, or simply by searching VMware HCL, and you'll choose your version of ESXi here when it comes up, looking for systems and servers. And since I'm running vSphere 7, that's great. The current version is only 6.7 update 3, and we can do a search for my little super micro system. I've pre-typed that in, the E208D, and we can update these results to see that yes, indeed, it is supported for ESXi 6.7 update 3. And as you dive in a little bit on your system, you might see some other notes, like a particular version of the BIOS that they recommend, and so on. Okay. All right. In the meantime, let's go ahead and continue with the installation of ESXi. We'll accept the license agreement. And at this point, it's going to scan for devices on which, or to which, that you can install ESXi itself. You'll notice here that I have a couple of NVMe solid state devices here. One is a 500 gig, the other is a 1 terabyte device, and then I've got the SanDisk USB stick itself. I'm going to install to the USB stick, which is perfectly fine. But you'll notice here that these two local devices might be perfect for vSAN. The nice thing about vSAN is that it's fully hyperconverged, and we can use internal storage to create a network-based shared data store. So we'll use one of these later on for a caching device and the other for a capacity device. But in the meantime, we'll just install ESXi on this USB stick, and we'll have our systems boot from that as we continue. It's going to prompt us that it's going to erase all the data, which is just fine because the entire installer itself is loaded into RAM at this point. We'll choose United States keyboard for the language. That's my preference. We'll type in a password that will be assigned to the user root. We'll hit 11 to do the install, as it warns us that it's going to repartition that USB stick into several different partitions. Now, the boot partitions themselves have actually been simplified in version 7.0 versus earlier versions. So if anybody's noticing the difference between the versions 6.7 and earlier in 7.0, that's one of the things that you'll notice. It's telling us at this point that we should remove our installation media, but the installation media is now actually the boot media. So let's just go ahead and hit enter. We'll reboot the server, and when we come back, we should actually see ESXi starting for the first time. And ESXi is running. All right. It's got an IP address that it's received from DHCP for management. We can see here that it's 192.168.1.200 in my environment. In your environment, it'll obviously be different. And it's telling us that in order to manage that host, we should go to that IP address to access the graphical interface via a web page. Okay. In other words, not much to see here, but there are a few things that we can do. The F12 key obviously allows us to shut down and restart. If we hit the F2 key, it'll prompt us to log in, where we can customize the system as well as view the logs. So let's go ahead and log in with the F2 key and see what it is that we can modify at this point. You see, we can configure the password for the root account. We can configure the management network. Now, we remember that this, first of all, started with an IP address on that came from DHCP, but we may want to change that here to a static IP address. And I'm going to go ahead and do that, just make a little change in it here, but most importantly, give it a static IP address. You'll see the subnet mask and the default gateway there. Okay, we can modify DNS for ourselves, which I've done, which came from DHCP, but at this point we can use static as well, and we can give it a host name. I'm going to call this one vSAN04. Okay, very nice. And I'll set the DNS suffix to the coopers.lan, which is my little home lab. Very nice. Okay, now that we've got that all squared away, we will hit the escape key and restart the management network. And now that's done, there's a couple of the things that we can do. We can test the management network by pinging a few things, resolving host names, and so on. All right, so we'll get successful pings. And if your system has been placed in DNS, and mine has, then we are good to resolve that as well. you can restore network options if for some reason you lose your management network or you get disconnected from a distributed switch. The network restore options are available there. You can change the language here. Here under troubleshooting options, it allows us to enable the ESXi shell as well as SSH. So we'll go ahead and enable those. Now, of course, those might be considered vectors for attack. So when your system is fully configured and up and running workloads and things like that, it's a best practice to come back and disable these. Now you can do that both from this DCUI or the direct console user interface, as well as through the graphical interface that we will see in a second on the web page. You can modify the idle timeout, and you can modify the ESX shell and SSH timeouts there as well. Okay, so let's go ahead at this point and move over to the web page on 123. Okay. Now, we haven't installed any certificates yet, so it's a self-signed certificate, so we'll have to bypass that in the browser, and all of a sudden we're prompted to log in. We can log in as root. Let's try turning caps lock off. Type in the password that we have just configured. And now we can see that we have full access to ESXi. Okay, go ahead and join the Customer Experience Improvement Program. That's not only there for VMware, but it's there for you. There's all kinds of really great features that you get access to now that with the Customer Experience Improvement Program. Okay, ESX shell is enabled on the host. SSH is enabled on the host. These are just warnings. Disable unless it's necessary. And we're going to go ahead and dismiss that notification as well as this. There's a couple of other things here. It's saying, first of all, that we are potentially vulnerable to the Intel CPU vulnerabilities. I forget the name of them off the top of my head. Sorry about that. But you get that, and we are currently using ESXi in evaluation mode. There's a 60-day evaluation license. You can type in your own license key when you get a chance here. You'll also note that there is a network available to us. We've got a virtual machine network, and we've got a management network. Okay. Anyway, we'll get into that in a little bit as we install vCenter for the first time so that we can then begin to manage this and create our vSAN data stores from here. So that winds us up for the installation of ESXi on a clean host. Okay. Talk to you soon. Thanks.